Today, we are going to look at the most horrifying snake encounters ever documented, incidents pieced together from recovered footage, official records, and investigative reports. From a fatal enclosure transfer in remote Africa to a misidentified snake on a darkened worksite, each case follows the same quiet pattern of warning, decision, and irreversible consequence. It was April 6, 2014, just before dusk, in the high desert outside Bishop, California. The air was dry and windless, the sky a thin wash of pale blue fading toward evening. The gravel service road that cut between maintenance sheds and a line of electrical transmission towers was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every footstep sound louder than it should. Heat from the day still clung to the ground, radiating upward in soft waves, while the shadows from steel pylons stretched long across the sand and scrub. The maintenance yard sat several miles from the nearest town, bordered by low sagebrush and scattered basalt outcrops. Beyond the fencing, the terrain dropped into shallow washes where rodents burrowed and reptiles hunted during the cooling hours. The facility was functional and minimal: concrete pads, metal tool lockers, and a single equipment shed with a corrugated roof that ticked softly as it cooled. There was no one else working that evening. The radio on the dash of a parked service truck had been turned off, and the yard was otherwise silent. Michael Raines, a 52-year-old line maintenance technician, had worked alone in similar settings for nearly 3 decades. His routine rarely varied. He inspected grounding cables, logged transformer readings, and locked up before dark. Known among supervisors as dependable and methodical, Michael preferred late shifts when interruptions were rare. He had developed this preference after years of rotating schedules and believed solitude helped him focus. That afternoon, he had extended his shift to finish replacing a damaged junction box near the perimeter fence, a task he had postponed earlier in the week. Michael had been up since before dawn. A minor overnight storm had caused alarms on a nearby line, and he had taken the call after only a few hours of sleep. He drank coffee throughout the day and skipped lunch, telling himself he would eat after the final inspection. Fatigue had become a background condition, something he no longer actively noticed. He parked his truck near the fence, gathered his tools, and walked toward the junction box just as the sun dipped behind the hills. Southern Pacific rattlesnakes inhabit this region, well adapted to arid environments. Medium to large pit vipers, they possess hemotoxic venom capable of causing extensive tissue damage, coagulopathy, and progressive circulatory compromise. While many bites are defensive and occur when the animal is surprised at close range, delayed treatment in isolated areas significantly increases the risk of severe outcomes. Antivenom is effective when administered promptly, but access in remote settings depends on rapid evacuation and clear communication. Several warning signals had been present that evening. The temperature drop after sunset increased reptile activity along the rocky fence line. The junction box sat beside a pile of loose conduit and scrap material that provided ideal cover. Michael wore heavy work boots, but no gaiters, and he had chosen to work alone beyond standard daylight hours. Fatigue reduced his situational awareness, and the hum of insects masked subtle environmental cues. As he crouched to open the junction box, his left foot shifted against the gravel. The movement displaced a flat piece of metal leaning against the fence. Beneath it, coiled tightly against the cool shade of the steel post, was the rattlesnake. From less than a foot away, in a confined space between the fence and the equipment housing, the snake delivered a single defensive strike. The motion was fast and controlled. The fangs penetrated just above the top of Michael's boot, then withdrew immediately. He felt the impact as a sharp pressure rather than pain. He stood upright, instinctively stepping back. 2 puncture marks were visible through the fabric of his sock, already seeping blood. The snake remained coiled briefly, rattling once, then slipped into the scrub beyond the fence. Michael walked back to his truck with measured steps. He sat on the tailgate and rinsed the wound with bottled water, a response consistent with basic first aid knowledge. He wrapped the area loosely with gauze from his kit. At that point, his symptoms were minimal. He considered driving himself to the hospital but hesitated. It was over an hour away by road, and his radio signal in the yard was unreliable. He decided to call dispatch once he finished securing the equipment. Within 20 minutes, the hemotoxic envenomation began to progress. Swelling spread around his ankle, and the skin tightened. Pain intensified steadily, and a dull ache extended up his calf. He attempted to stand and felt his balance falter, an early sign of impaired coordination. His breathing remained steady, but his heart rate increased noticeably. 30 minutes after the bite, nausea set in. He reached for his phone but found his fingers less responsive than usual. The swelling had advanced past mid-calf, and small bruised patches appeared around the bite site, consistent with venom-induced tissue damage. He managed to call dispatch, but his speech was slightly slurred, making it difficult to convey details clearly. The call dropped before confirmation could be completed. Over the next hour, Michael's condition deteriorated. The pain became severe, and the swelling continued to advance. Hemotoxic effects disrupted clotting, and blood oozed from the puncture marks despite compression. He experienced lightheadedness and shallow breathing as his body attempted to compensate for circulatory stress. He remained conscious, seated beside the truck, intermittently attempting to stand. A co-worker arrived after Michael failed to check out at the end of the shift. He found the truck parked with the doors open, and Michael slumped against the rear tire, minimally responsive. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived and initiated supportive care, but transport time remained prolonged. Michael went into shock en route to the hospital. The investigation revealed that delayed treatment, solo work, fatigue, and environmental conditions contributed to the severity of the outcome. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as complications of hemotoxic envenomation with circulatory collapse. The junction box was secured the following day. The scrap metal pile remained against the fence, undisturbed. It was September 18, 2016, in the lowland rice fields near Can Tho, Vietnam, shortly after midnight. Heavy humidity pressed down on the landscape, and a light fog hovered just above the flooded paddies. Crickets and frogs filled the air with layered sound, masking subtle movement in the waterlogged field margins. A narrow dirt path separated the paddies from a line of storage sheds where pumps and harvesting equipment were kept under tarpaulins. Nguyen Than Bin, a 34-year-old seasonal equipment mechanic, had stayed late to repair a diesel pump needed for morning irrigation. The harvest was approaching, and delays could affect multiple families who relied on coordinated water management. Bin had grown up in the region and was accustomed to working barefoot or in thin sandals. That night, he wore rubber sandals and carried a flashlight with fading batteries. Cobras are common in the Mekong Delta, particularly the monocled cobra, an elapid species with potent neurotoxic venom. Their venom interferes with neuromuscular transmission, leading to progressive paralysis and respiratory failure without timely antivenom. In rural areas, delayed treatment significantly increases mortality risk. Several compounding risks were present. It was nighttime with limited visibility. Bin worked alone in a flooded area known to harbor rodents and snakes. His flashlight beam was dim, and the path near the shed was cluttered with hoses and boards. He had consumed alcohol earlier in the evening at a communal meal, mildly impairing judgment. As he stepped back from the pump, his foot pressed into soft mud near the shed wall. The monocled cobra, sheltering beneath a loose board, reacted instantly. In a close-range defensive strike, the snake bit his foot and released. The bite occurred within a confined space between stacked equipment and the wall. Bin felt immediate burning pain. He shouted instinctively and dropped his tools. The snake reared briefly, hood spread, then retreated into the flooded field. 2 puncture marks were visible on the top of his foot. He rinsed the wound with water from the paddy and tied cloth around his ankle, believing it might slow venom spread. Neurotoxic effects can be deceptively delayed. For the first 30 minutes, Bin remained mobile, though anxious. He walked toward a nearby house to seek help. Gradually, he noticed tingling around his lips and fingertips, early signs consistent with neurotoxic envenomation. His speech became slightly slurred when he spoke to a neighbor, and he complained of dizziness. An hour after the bite, muscle weakness increased. His coordination declined, and he struggled to maintain balance on the uneven path. His breathing grew shallow, requiring conscious effort. He was placed on a motorbike and transported toward the nearest clinic. The clinic lacked antivenom for cobra envenomation and did not have mechanical ventilation. Staff attempted supportive care while arranging transfer to a regional hospital. During transport, Bin's respiratory muscles weakened further. He lost the ability to speak clearly, then became unresponsive. He arrived at the hospital in respiratory failure. Despite efforts, he could not be intubated in time. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Investigation revealed that delayed treatment, night work, limited equipment, and alcohol consumption compounded the risks. The pump was repaired the next day by another worker. The loose board beside the shed was left in place. It was January 11, 2019, during a winter afternoon in rural Andalusia, Spain. Low clouds hung over olive groves stretched across rolling hills. Recent rains had left the soil damp and the air cold. A small stone farmhouse sat at the edge of the grove, its outbuildings used for tool storage and seasonal processing. Elena Morales, a 61-year-old retiree, spent most days tending the grove with her husband. That afternoon, she worked alone, clearing debris from an irrigation channel blocked by fallen branches. She wore gardening gloves and rubber boots, moving steadily along the narrow ditch. European vipers inhabit the region, including the Latastes viper. This species possesses hemotoxic venom that can cause local tissue damage and systemic effects. Although bites are often defensive, delayed treatment, especially in older individuals with underlying health issues, increases risk. Warning signs included damp weather driving reptiles toward sheltered channels, limited mobility due to age-related joint issues, and working alone far from immediate assistance. The channel edge was overgrown, reducing visibility. As Elena reached into the ditch to remove a branch, her hand disturbed a viper resting beneath leaf litter. In a defensive strike at close range, the snake bit her wrist and released. She withdrew her hand immediately. The snake retreated into the vegetation. Pain and swelling developed quickly. She walked back toward the farmhouse, applying pressure with her glove. Within 30 minutes, her wrist was visibly swollen, and bruising appeared. She felt nauseated and lightheaded, consistent with early hemotoxic effects. She attempted to call her husband, but dropped the phone due to reduced coordination. Her speech on a subsequent call was slurred. She managed to reach the kitchen and sit. Over the next hour, swelling extended up her forearm, and bleeding from the puncture continued despite compression. Her husband returned to find her slumped at the table with shallow breathing. Emergency services arrived, but transport time was significant due to rural roads. Elena went into shock en route and died shortly after arrival. Investigation revealed that age, isolation, and delayed treatment contributed. The irrigation channel remained partially cleared. It was July 29, 2020, on the outskirts of Durban, South Africa, during an early evening thunderstorm. Heavy rain fell intermittently, driving wildlife toward higher ground. A small informal settlement bordered a construction site where drainage trenches had been dug earlier that day. Saifo Dlamini, a 27-year-old construction laborer, returned after hours to retrieve tools left behind. He wore casual clothing and sandals, navigating muddy ground with limited lighting. Puff adders are common in the region. They possess cytotoxic venom causing severe tissue damage and swelling. Bites often occur when the snake is accidentally stepped on, delivering a defensive strike from close range. Risks included poor lighting, wet ground, fatigue after a long shift, and working alone. Debris piles created confined spaces where snakes sheltered. As Saifo stepped over a trench, he placed his foot directly beside a concealed puff adder. The snake delivered a defensive strike to his ankle. He jumped back, slipping in the mud. The snake did not pursue. Swelling began rapidly. Within minutes, pain was severe. He attempted to walk, but his coordination failed. Neighbors assisted him, but transport to medical care was delayed by flooding. Cytotoxic envenomation progressed, causing extensive swelling and tissue damage. He reached a clinic hours later. Despite antivenom administration, complications developed. He died from systemic effects and infection days later. Investigation revealed that environmental conditions and delayed treatment were consistent with severe envenomation outcomes. The trench was filled the following week. It was November 3, 2021, in the dry savanna outside Alice Springs, Australia, late in the afternoon. The heat lingered despite the lowering sun. Red soil and sparse grass stretched to the horizon. Thomas Kelly, a 45-year-old surveyor, worked alone mapping fence lines. He wore long pants but no gaiters. Fatigue from a full day under the sun slowed his movements. Death adders inhabit the region. Their neurotoxic venom causes rapid paralysis. Bites often occur when they are stepped on, remaining still rather than retreating. Warnings included heat fatigue, working alone, and poor visibility near ground cover. As Thomas stepped backward while checking coordinates, he placed his foot near a coiled death adder. The snake delivered a defensive strike to his calf in a close-range, confined space between rocks. Symptoms progressed rapidly. Within minutes, he felt numbness and weakness. He attempted to radio for help, but his speech became slurred. His breathing grew shallow as neurotoxic effects advanced. Rescuers found him unconscious 2 hours later. Despite antivenom, he died from respiratory failure. The survey markers remained undisturbed. These incidents, separated by geography and circumstance, share a common pattern of isolated work, compounding risks, delayed treatment, and the clinical progression of envenomation. In each case, the environment remained unchanged after the response, quiet and indifferent to what had occurred.